Hello, this is the first episode of the GD Report podcast. I'm G, and this is D.
Hey, that was a great intro there, G man.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Tonight we're gonna talk about the upcoming Senate race and what prospects, if any, the Democrats might have for taking over the Senate. So we're going to take a look at 10 different races tonight. We're going to go to Iowa, Montana, Maine, North Carolina, Alabama, Kansas, Arizona, Texas, Georgia, and I think that's it. I might have missed one. But we're going to start with Montana. So in Montana, we've got Steve Bullock and Steve Daines. So D, what do you think in that? What are you thinking there? You think the Dems have a chance?
Yeah. First of all, I want to welcome everybody to our podcast and say it's always awesome to talk with you, man.
Same here, brother.
I think this is going to be a really fun and interesting year for everybody who's into politics. I mean, I know I look at it. I get excited every election year, but I think this one's even more exciting. We obviously have the presidential, but you look at all these Senate races that are up for grabs, and there's a lot of things that have expanded in the Democrats' way, Montana being one of those. I think initially when Steve Bullock was going to run for president and he entered the presidential race pretty late for the Democratic nomination, there's a lot of calls for him to drop out early on and go ahead and get in the Senate race.
Yeah, I remember that.
He resisted that because everybody wants to be, especially when they come from a governor background, they're used to being that executive. But he's super popular in the state, and it makes a ton of sense for the Democrats. He's their dream candidate.
Yeah.
And in Montana, they've had a lot of success with Brian Schweitzer, the former governor, winning 2 terms, and then with John Tester right now as well.
Right.
And his success.
I remember Tester. Didn't Trump do his level best to get him beat?
He sure did. He did. He campaigned, went to the state, I think 2 or 3 times, and to try to get him beat, and Tester survived it. So there's that really upper Midwest, mountain version of populism there, and I think that Steve Bullock fits it to a T. He's a good family guy.
Yep.
He's super popular as a governor. He's done a great job as far as leading them through the coronavirus, which is where everybody's had to look for leadership is to the governor level, because there's been such a vacuum at the presidential level with COVID. But I think Steve Bullock's got a really strong chance. I think and this will be a theme we'll talk about a lot tonight, but I think what it boils down to is if we reach a point, say after both conventions, and say it's October 1, and the polls are still where they are today with Biden up double digits in some cases, I think at that point, the Republican Senate candidates have to decide if they want to unanchor from Trump.
Yeah.
And it could cost them some, but their play is going to be at that point, if the polls hold, which 100 days out, a lot of things can change. But if the polls hold and it's still a wide margin at that point, people like Steve Daines are going to be saying, I'm your last chance to prevent Chuck Schumer from being the Senate lead. And I'm your last hope of preventing a full Democratic sweep where Joe Biden gets to push through the scariest form of socialism you'll ever hear. And so that's going to be the challenge. And we'll see if somebody like Steve Daines has the political willpower to pull away from Trump. And I think that's really, Steve Bullock's in the driver's seat in this election because he can play that popular card of a governor. If Biden continues to perform well, and honestly, as long as Trump keeps making errors, I think that somebody like a Steve Bullock continues to show really well.
Right. So the current Senate makeup is 53-47, correct?
Right.
Okay, so we're going to give Montana to the Democrats as of right now?
Yep.
Okay, so that brings it to 53-48. No, 52-48. Sorry.
Math check.
Sorry for that. All right, so let's go down to Colorado, where we've got another former presidential candidate, 2-term Democratic Governor John Hickenlooper, who finally acceded to the Democrats' wishes and jumped into the Senate race. And he's running against incumbent Cory Gardner in what some say is the most vulnerable Senate race in the country. So what's your take on that one, Dee?
Well, I'm gonna cede a lot of time to you on this one, just because I know you know Colorado politics even better than I do with your background. But I think Hickenlooper was their dream candidate again. He
Right.
was who they wanted, and I think Democrats were they were pretty lucky with the one. There was a few they missed out on. Texas, they did not get Beto O'Rourke. Georgia, they did not convince Stacey Abrams to run. Those are two of the big high-profile candidates they really wanted to run this time. But getting Hickenlooper, I think, was a really coup de grace for them. However, he stumbled a little bit. He struggled with his message on Black Lives Matter, and it almost cost him in the primary. That, coupled with the ethics charges that came about, and it still ceases to amaze me, or still amazes me. I don't know if I got the phrase right there. That in this day and age, with campaigns as large as there are, there's going to be violations. But it still amazes me that politicians will fight those kinds of things sometimes, instead of just ponying up and admitting that mistakes were made, because it ends up blowing up into something that was probably not that big a deal. But the denial and the refusal of the subpoena, in that case, turned into be a really big challenge for him. So he struggled a little bit in the primary against what was the guy, Andrew
Romanoff.
Romanoff, that's right. Yeah. And so now I think he's got a chance to reset his footing. I think Cory Gardner's in a lot of trouble. I think he's Cory Gardner is his politics he's still kind of 4 years ago.
Right.
He had the big win 6 years ago, and then 4 years ago he hitched himself full to the Trump train, and he his only saving grace I think that he's got is, again, if he tries to unhitch from that, and if he could get Mitch McConnell to pass a cannabis legalization bill, and he could claim the authorship of that. That's like really the only thing he has, but I don't see Mitch moving on that. And we're getting to the point of the congressional calendar where we both know nothing's going to happen between September and the election. So I think once they get the next round of stimulus done, it's going to be really tough to get anything legislatively done, because everybody's going to be focused on the elections. So I think Cory Gardner's in a lot of trouble, and I don't think he has I think he has too much to lose by unhitching from Trump at this point, and I think it's going to be what drives him down.
Well, Hickenlooper, you're right. He did stumble there, which, doesn't really make a lot of sense to me either, because it was the $2,300 expenditure. It was basically a couple of plane rides that he took from Republicans here in the state, which, any politician with sense would know that you're accepting something from a member of the opposition party. It's going to come back to bite you at some point. So why he just didn't pay the fine and issue a mea culpa, which is what he did anyway, is just beyond me. But in the end, I think Hickenlooper pulls it out. I think Cory Gardner is a master campaigner. He beat longtime incumbent Mark Udall. And the Udall name out west is just, it's really strong politically. His cousin, I think, is a senator out of New Mexico, or was.
Yeah, he's retiring. Yep.
Yeah, and so, so don't underestimate Cory Gardner. I think it's going to end up with voter turnout, and, how much the Dems in, Denver and Fort Collins and Boulder want to see Hickenlooper get that seat. Out in Weld County and down in El Paso County, down in Colorado Springs and all of the West, Cory Gardner is solid. I don't see them voting against him. So I think it's going to come out to voter turnout, and I think it might be a lot closer than people think. But for right now, we'll go ahead and give Colorado to the Dems.
Yeah, I think Colorado's another example where Jared Polis has led really well on the coronavirus front.
Yeah, he's got about an 80% approval rating on that right now.
And so I think that's, the states where the governors have led really strongly on that. And we'll do another podcast about 2024 because we haven't gotten through 2020 yet. But you and I were talking earlier, like you look at a governor like a Larry Hogan and some of those folks, and just the leadership that they've shown. Jared Polis has been outstanding. I think that helps propel the style of leadership that the Democrats have. So I agree. I think it goes to the Democrats.
Yeah. All right. So let's move over to let's go all the way up to Maine and let's talk about that race.
Yeah,
So
I really miss lobsters this time of year. So
right. So we've got Susan Collins against Sarah Gideon. And I know that in our previous conversations, you've expressed a lot of enthusiasm for Sarah Gideon. So
yeah,
I think we all know about Susan Collins. So why don't you tell us about Sarah Gideon?
Sarah Gideon, I think she's I don't want to gush too much about her, but I think she's a great candidate. Speaker of the House of the Maine legislature. She's been a huge champion in the opioid treatment crisis and really passed a lot of really resounding legislation. That's a huge issue, and especially in the Northeast, they've had some big problems with opioid. I mean, every state has, but really in the Northeast, they've had some big problems with the opioid treatment issues, and she's passed a lot of things there. She's super relatable. She's got a great family, and well connected in the state, well connected in the political circles. I think, I don't want to underestimate Susan Collins because she's pulled it out before when people didn't think that she could. But I think it's going to be really hard for her in this election to run as an independent, which is what she tries to, even though she's registered as Republican, she positions herself as an independent voice for Maine. It's going to be really hard because she's tied herself so closely to Trump. There's been so many tough votes. The vote on impeachment.
The Kavanaugh vote is going to sink her, I think.
Absolutely. The vote on impeachment, I think, is one. And then I was going to bring up that next thing, you beat me to it, the Kavanaugh vote, where it was just such a tough vote for somebody like her who's pro-choice. And she, I believe, unless I'm mistaken, I think she's the last Northeast Republican senator.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
There used to be a ton of them. You look at in Maine, you used to have 2 female Republican senators. You had Republicans were really strong in Connecticut, all down the coast there. Even New York at a while. Sometimes we forget about Alphonse D'Amato and some of those folks.
Right.
But you had those liberal Republicans, and they've pretty much been swept out of the party. Either primaried or primaried so hard that if they won the nomination, they ended up getting beat. Right. I think Susan Collins loses this race, and I think she's been in Washington for I think this is her 4th term she's been there. She's been there like 24 years or something. Right. I don't have the exact date, but she's been there a long time. I think it's Sarah Gideon's kind of a fresh face. People know her in the state. It's really easy to pin that Washington label on her, and I think the votes are really tough. I don't underestimate her. I still think there's a chance it could be close, but as an incumbent senator with the reputation that she's had in Maine, being down, the last poll I saw had Sarah Gideon up by 4 or 5 points. I think at this stage in the game, that's tough for somebody like Susan Collins to be down that much.
Well, and she's Sarah Gideon has raised a ton of money, and I think she just got that $3 million bonus from the Save Brett, what's the word I'm looking for?
Stop Brett Kavanaugh group.
Yeah, the Stop Brett Kavanaugh group. Yeah, so she's pretty flush with cash, which always, it's always a good thing to have if you're going to run a race.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of you were talking about the rural versus urban dynamics of Colorado. There's definitely some of that in Maine as well. There's some counties you get really far north and you get really far west, but the coastal cities I think are going to be strong. I think it'll be interesting. I always love Maine politics because of Stephen King.
Right.
Typically gets involved. He's been a big supporter of Sarah Gideon so far, and also very virulent in his Twitter attacks on both Trump and Collins. So it should be a lot of fun to watch.
Right. So that's 3 Dem pickups. Let's go down and let's look at Arizona for a minute. And the reason I want to is because I think you and I agree these are 4 seats. They say the Dems need 4 seats to flip the Senate. And I think these are their 4 best shots. So we'll talk about these. We've talked about 3 already. We'll talk about Arizona. Then we'll move into some of the areas where it might be a little bit more tougher for them. So looking at Arizona, we've got Martha McSally, who couldn't win a Senate race on her own and was appointed against the family's wishes to John McCain's old seat. And so she's the quote, the air quote, incumbent, and she's running against, a space legend in Mark Kelly.
Yeah, you've got Mark Kelly with his astronaut background, but he's also the spouse of Gabby Giffords,
Right.
The former congresswoman who was now
Shot
a
in
gun
the head.
activist after being shot.
Yeah.
And I think, McSally has also had a lot of unforced errors. She's not done a lot to. Arizona's been trending purple, and there's a big influx of obviously a border state. There's a large Latino community. There's
Right.
a large population of people who are relocating to Arizona,
Right.
in the Phoenix metro, the Tucson metro, and so she didn't do a lot to really brandish that kind of maverick label that John McCain had, where even though he could be pretty hawkish on some things, he also worked across the aisle. I mean, McCain-Feingold, everybody knows that name, and they forget sometimes Russ Feingold's a pretty liberal Democrat from Wisconsin.
Right.
So McCain wasn't afraid to do those kinds of things, and McSally hasn't done that. In fact, I don't really know. I can't look at when I've done some background on her. I haven't seen that she's had much of a legislative accomplishment yet.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I think nobody likes to vote, and I don't like to call anybody this, but nobody likes to vote for a loser.
Right.
And it's a little bit of Adlai Stevenson syndrome, I think. But she was on the ballot once and got beat, and then got appointed, and then I think there was a lot of better picks that governor could have picked instead of her, and I think that she's a weak candidate as far as reelection. I think Mark Kelly is strong. I think he wins this one because he's got the credentials of the Air Force and of I don't know if he's technically Space Force yet,
Right.
but he's got those credentials. And I think he's got, you think about that election that McSally lost to Kristen Sinema, and Kristen Sinema is kind of a maverick in that role, even though she's liberal on some issues. She's voted with the Republicans a couple of times on some little bit of surprise issues. She's also kind of known for she's ruffled some feathers with her fashion style, which is crazy in 2020 that's what we're talking about, or that's what, not you and I, that's what some pundits are talking about.
Right.
But she's a different kind of person, and she's the first openly bisexual senator as well.
Right.
And so Arizona's known for that, and I think it could be the first time we start to see that Sun Belt sweep, where you're looking at both senators from California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado are all Democrats.
Right. Yeah. So we'll put that one in the Dems column. Now, let's start to look at some races that are a little more problematic. And let's go up to North Carolina and take a look at that race. So that's incumbent Tom Tillis against Democratic challenger Cal Cunningham. So what's your take on that?
Well, Tom Tillis wants everybody to go back and remember how things were before coronavirus. And
Right.
That was his quote this week. He said he thinks that President Trump gets reelected because people will remember how good things were before this virus hit. I think that's a bit of a pipe dream, because when this type of pandemic hits, this is a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence that none of us will ever forget.
Right.
And so I don't think it's very easy to hit rewind and go back to that. And voters are not typically selective where they go back in time. I mean, if they were, George H.W. Bush would have been reelected in a landslide.
Yep.
It's what's happening at the time of the election. Tillis is another one that's it's kind of a Cory Gardner type scenario in the fact that he came in on the Republican wave, and he's endeared himself to the right wing pretty hard, endeared himself to Trump. North Carolina is always one of those swing states where you just kind of never know what's going to happen in the election. I think Obama won North Carolina twice, and then Trump came back and won it. If I'm not incorrect, didn't Trump win North Carolina?
He did, but at the same time they elected a Democratic governor.
It's a good point. Yeah. And then the Republican legislature stripped all the powers away from him that they had given the previous Republican governor. Not that I'm bitter about that, but
Right.
I think Tillis is going to struggle. I think, and this could be the seat that politicos like you and me, we're going to know this seat. We're going to know it's up for grabs. But I think when we get the early returns on election night, if this will be one that I think is going to be called really quickly for Cal Cunningham. He's a great challenger. He's got the military background, very well liked, very well respected. I think this seat gets called early on election night, and I think this could be the harbinger when we see this, you start to talk about Democratic tsunami.
Right. Well, I agree with you. I think, as you know, I have family that lives in North Carolina, and so this topic comes up a lot. And I think, you know, the polls currently have Cunningham up. He's raised a ton of money. He's a great candidate for the Dems, and I think they take this seat, and I think they take it in a pretty wide margin. I agree with you. I think it gets called pretty early. So we'll put that in the Dems column. Let's go over to Iowa, where we've got Joni Ernst versus I'm sorry, who's Joni running against?
Teresa Greenfield.
Teresa Greenfield, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't read my own hand scratching. Sorry.
Teresa Greenfield surprised, and she was the Emily's List pick for the in the Democratic primary. So she was very well known. She had the name recognition. It wasn't a big surprise that she won the primary. What was a surprise is she doubled the quarterly fundraising that Joni Ernst had.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of interest in this race. She's got a farming background as well. Joni Ernst obviously has an ag background, farming background. Teresa Greenfield does too. She's a middle class business owner, very well liked. Joni Ernst has gone through some PR issues. She had some tough family issues and personal issues. I don't know that plays a lot into this, but I think that she went to Washington to change Washington, and there's a lot of people in Iowa, the people that I've talked to, that say they feel like she didn't change Washington, she became Washington.
Right.
So there's that image of her where she hasn't gotten a lot done, and she also recently she hasn't helped herself with some quotes. And I gotta ask sometimes, and I'm not applying for the jobs, but I gotta ask sometimes, who are these people's press consultants that let them give some of these interviews? Because she just gave an interview last week or the week before where she said she went on and on in glowing terms about how that she's totally fine with Trump, even if he loses the election, pushing through judicial nominees in a lame duck session, which she's on record with the whole Merrick Garland issue with President Obama, where she said there shouldn't be any kind of judicial appointments during an election calendar year. And so she came across very hypocritical. I mean, everybody knows that Mitch, Moscow Mitch will try to push through whatever he can. As long as he's in power and as long as he's got the gavel, he'll try to push it through. I just don't think Republicans do themselves any justice by talking about it.
Right. Well, currently, looking at the polls, Greenfield has got a 2-point lead. Now, that's definitely within the margin of error. And so I think this is a race that's going to come down to the wire. I don't think Iowans are ready to turn their state over to a Democratic senator. So I'm going to keep that in the Republicans column.
I'm gonna go on record that I disagree with you, but if you want to keep it in Republicans, I'm fine for a tally.
Okay.
I think Teresa Greenfield becomes part of that wave just because of her fundraising prowess. Because like I said, she raised, I think it was like $3.4 million.
Right. Well, we're 100 days out, right? So we'll revisit this in, a few more times before the race, actually.
Hey, we don't always have to agree, brother.
That's right. Yeah, we don't always have to agree. Let's see. So Alabama, Doug Jones versus Tommy Tuberville. Before we get into that, let me just say I have a little bit of history with Tommy. He was an assistant coach at Texas A&M back in the day when I was a budding sports writer for the Dallas Morning News and then the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And let me just say, I thought he was crazy then. I followed his career, and I think he's still crazy. And I think Alabamans are going to send him to the U.S. Senate, and I think they're all crazy for doing it. So what's your take?
No, I think this is the biggest chance for a pickup that Republicans have, and it's just because of the electoral history of Alabama, the politics of Alabama. Now, I think there are some things that work in Doug Jones' favor. I think Doug Jones is very well respected and liked around the state, even in Republican circles. He's
Right.
done a really great job. I've got a lot of friends in Alabama, and Doug Jones has done a great job with constituent services, which we forget about sometimes. That's really the nature of the job. It's not all fundraising and being on Fox News and MSNBC and CNN. Right. It gets down to constituent services. And everything I've heard about Doug Jones is he's been super responsive. He's helped tons of his constituents with issues that they've had, working on farm bills to be able to help the farmers in Alabama. And so he's very well liked. And so that goes really strongly because it goes back to that old Tip O'Neill saying about all politics being local.
Right.
And so it really comes down to that. I think the other thing is, I think Republicans did him a favor by nominating Tommy Tuberville, because I think Jeff Sessions would have been a lot harder for him to beat head to head.
I think you're right.
Because Jeff Sessions has won statewide in Alabama. Jeff Sessions is enough of a politician. He knows what to say and when to say it. He was even though Trump was going after him and saying all kinds of stuff, he kept his cool pretty much and didn't overreact because he knew he needed those Trump voters to try to win the primary. Now, the interesting thing I think will be if Tuberville will come. Everybody wants to accuse Joe Biden of being in the basement and hiding, but Tuberville's the same way. And I shouldn't say the same way because I don't agree with the statement about Biden. I think Biden's following the coronavirus guidelines right now and waiting for the right opportunities once the nominating convention comes out. And he's also, from a political standpoint, you just give Trump a microphone and it helps you every day. But right. Tuberville, so far, he refused to debate Jeff Sessions. So he wouldn't have any head-to-head debates with Jeff Sessions. I think Doug Jones has got to exploit that. He's got a campaign based on the fact that me, you think you know him, but do you really know him? Right. He's a football coach, but how's he going to be as your senator? Because so far, Tommy Tuberville has been a noun, a verb, and Donald Trump. That's been his campaign so far.
Yep.
And it'll be interesting to see if he's willing to debate, because it's a lot harder when you actually have to do the hard work of a campaign, debate, no ideas, no issues inside and out, as opposed to just a bunch of rah-rah talking points. I do think the politics favor Tuberville to win that seat, and I'm probably going to lean towards Republican, picking it up as much as I hate to,
right?
Because I think it's a shame because Doug Jones, if you know anything of his background, he prosecuted the bombers of the Second Avenue Baptist Church in Birmingham from the church bombings back in the 60s.
Right.
Killed the 4 little girls.
Yep.
He was one of the prosecuting attorneys that helped prosecute those. He's a solid guy. But I think Alabama loses if Doug Jones loses, but I think he will.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I'm with you. I think Alabama is just too much attached to Trump. Trump likes Tuberville, and so I think it's a slam dunk. And I'm with you. I think it's a shame. Now, one thing I think is in tangent is if the black vote comes out, the black women come out like they did in the previous election, in the special election that sent him to Washington, I think he's got a chance and he actually might be able to pull it out. But that's going to be a close race. It's either going to be a landslide, Tuberville, or it's going to be a close race, and it'll be a toss-up either way. But
now, I think you make a good point about turnout, because the other thing that we're not talking about is there's definitely motivation on both sides. Yep. But there can be, and I've seen it happen before, when a candidate's going to lose, if the polls are really, really, really bad for Trump moving into the election, there's times where supporters of that candidate are so depressed they don't even show up.
Right.
And so I could see that happening in Alabama and Doug Jones squeaking it out, but it's a long shot. And I think it'll be interesting to see once some head-to-head polls come out, and we'll see if Trump if he makes a couple of trips to Alabama to campaign for Tommy Tuberville. I think that'll tell us more about the internals as far as whether they think he's really running a strong race or not.
Right. Well, so we're going to put that one in the Republicans camp right now. So that brings us over to Georgia, and Georgia's an kind of an anomaly this year because it's got two separate elections. Correct?
Yeah. I think your word anomaly is a nice way of saying it's a mess.
Right. So they've got the one regular election, if I'm correct, and then they've got this one just big jumble of a mess. So tell us about that, Dee.
Yeah, you got David Perdue's seat, which is he's the incumbent and he's running for re-election, and so he's obviously the nominee there. They just had a regular primary, and John Ossoff won the Democratic nomination for that, and that'll be a head-to-head. John Ossoff, if you remember, he ran 4 years ago. He ran for a congressional seat just outside of Atlanta. It's the seat that Lucy McBath won in 2018, but Karen Handel was the person who won it the year before that. She had been involved in some of the Susan G. Komen anti-Planned Parenthood,
Right.
Those politics. Ossoff was and still is, a young man, a big kind of a rock star appeal, raised a ton of money from around the country, and he's done that again.
Right.
So he's won a bunch of money. The last poll I saw on this, and it was a Democratic poll, so you have to take that with a grain of salt, but it was Ossoff within 2 points. And I think that's pretty big for an incumbent Republican senator in Georgia. And it shows the purpling of that state too.
Right.
Stacey Abrams got really close. I still think Stacey Abrams actually won the governor race against Brian Kemp, but there was a lot of voter suppression. There was a lot of tricks going on down there last time. But Ossoff, I think he stands a decent chance of winning that seat, and I think that could be and I think he pulls a surprise out. I think people are going to be looking. We're going to talk in a second about the other seat. I think people are going to be watching that other seat a lot closer, and I think Ossoff wins a surprise on that side.
Well, the other thing you mentioned is, the Republican governor down there. I think a lot of Georgians right now are having buyer's remorse. He's tied himself to Trump. He's opened up the state. Their COVID numbers are blowing up, and there's a lot of people that are unhappy with how he's handling it.
Yeah, he's suing the mayor of Atlanta.
Yeah, he's suing the mayor of Atlanta. So, I mean, that's a whole other issue why they're doing that. That's another podcast. But so then tell us about the other election down there for the Senate seat in Georgia.
Yeah, Johnny Isaacson retired due to health reasons. And so in his case, that since he retired, his term was not up. In Georgia, what they have is, and a lot of states have this in the South, they call it the jungle primary. And that's where any candidate who wants to run, Gunnar, if you or I had established a residency in Georgia, we could have run.
Right.
But you get enough signatures, you get on the ballot, and everybody's on one ballot. There's no primary. It's all on the November ballot. And including the person who was appointed to fill his seat, which is Senator Kelly Loeffler. And Kelly Loeffler is she's an interesting pick by Brian Kemp. That was actually a case where, when you just mentioned him as governor of Georgia, that was a case where he actually went against President Trump's wishes, which doesn't happen a lot in the Republican Party these days. But he appointed Kelly Loeffler because he thought she'd be a stronger candidate with suburban women.
Right.
Around Atlanta. He thought she'd be a shoo-in for re-election. Trump wanted him to appoint Doug Collins. And if you remember Doug Collins from the Judiciary Committee, he's a member of the House of Representatives. He was the person who was constantly the minority member, ranking member, when Jerry Nadler's committee was going through impeachment. And so he was the one raising objections every single day. So Trump wanted him to pick him for that appointment, and he would be the favorite to win the seat. However, Brian Kemp didn't do that. He picked Kelly Loeffler. Loeffler's got a whole set of baggage on her side. Her husband is the president of the New York Stock Exchange. And right before the bad numbers about the coronavirus came out, she was one of the 4 senators implicated in a stock issue where there were ethics charges initially. She's been cleared of any wrongdoing, but it still doesn't really pass the smell test. She sold a bunch of healthcare related stock the day before the big numbers were going to come out about how bad coronavirus really was. And so there's a lot of things. Like I said, she's been cleared from ethics charges, but to a lot of people, they look at it and they go, this doesn't seem right. And so she's got that issue hanging over her. And she also recently was in the news because she's one of the co-owners of the Atlanta Dream, which is a WNBA team. And the WNBA has been very active with Black Lives Matter and the Breonna Taylor murder. And so they're highlighting that. And she came out and said she didn't think politics belonged in the WNBA. And she wishes her players would not participate. Well, we all know that the highest percentage of the players are African-American in the WNBA.
Right.
And it was very tone deaf for her to have a statement like that. So the players in the league want her kicked out as one of the owners.
Right.
And so she's kind of been a firebrand on a lot of different topics. Throw into the mix now that Doug Collins has decided to go ahead and run in the jungle primary against her, and he's been attacking her from the right. And so you got Doug Collins and her battling it out. Raphael Warnock is the lead candidate. There's several other candidates, Democrat, that has the most name recognition. He's a senior pastor at Emmanuel Baptist Church in Atlanta, which is the home church of Martin Luther King Sr. and Martin Luther King Jr.
Yep.
There in Atlanta, right outside the King Center. And so he's the leading candidate on the Democratic side. But the way that primary works is everybody's on the ballot in November, and then if nobody gets 50.1%, then the top two vote getters go to another election in December. And so we could have the Senate hanging in balance while we wait for that last election in December. I think Collins and Loeffler are going to split the vote pretty heavy. I'm surprised. The polls show that Collins is pretty far ahead on the Republican side of Loeffler. Warnock, I think he has a strong chance, depending on the vote and how it comes out in Atlanta. And again, who knows, with coronavirus, with voter suppression, with some of the folks being scared to vote, it could be a real challenge to see how many people vote, and then who those people are, what the makeup is. And then also if Brian Kemp makes sure he doesn't try anything to block vote by mail and those kinds of things. We should probably have a podcast about vote by mail with your experience on that in Colorado, because it's a huge issue facing the entire country with the virus right now. What's your take on the Georgia seats?
Well, I think right now I've got one Democrat, one Republican, but it wouldn't surprise me if the Republicans swept both of those. Just the way, having lived in Georgia, seen how people think down there, I think, I just think they're still in the, fighting the Civil War, and they think Republicans are their best chance to, reverse 150 years of progress. So that's what I think.
This is a case where the Democrats did not get their dream candidate. They wanted Stacey Abrams to run for that. She's got her sights on something bigger. She could be, they're saying that Biden could announce his VP choice in the next few days, I'm hearing.
Right.
So she's got her sights set on that. We'll have to talk about the horse race on that maybe on another podcast. But I think it'll be interesting to see, because Georgia's going to be another bellwether. If you see huge turnout in Georgia early on and when those polls close, and if there's an early call for a Democrat, either one of those seats, I think that spells big-time trouble for Trump nationwide.
Yeah, I think you're right. All right, so for our last seat, let's move up the coast a little bit to South Carolina. We've got incumbent Lindsey Graham against a guy I know you like a lot, Jamie Harrison.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit about, well, first of all, there's a little secret, I don't think it's very well kept about Lindsey Graham that most people might not know. So you want to talk about that, or you just want to sweep that under the rug for now?
I don't know what secret it is. I don't really want to talk about his personal life. I don't know. I was going to say there's another joke going around that says, well, I'm not going to say that one. It's basically it's talking about the fact that which Lindsey Graham are you going to get? I mean, Lindsey Graham was one of John McCain's best friends. He was known as almost like I don't like the term maverick, but like a Maverick Jr. a little bit, because he was always right there with McCain. He and Lieberman, fighting the fight and really battling for things.
Crossing party lines.
Yep. Absolutely. He was known as that kind of guy. So everybody looked to him when John McCain passed away that he would inherit that torch. And what happened? He became a sycophant for Trump.
Yep.
And it's so odd. And Jamie Harrison's got a great campaign commercial playing right now where it plays what Lindsey Graham said. People forget Lindsey Graham, he ran for the presidential nomination in 2016, the Republican side. He wasn't in very long because if you remember, Donald Trump released his cell phone number to the public.
Right.
And I would be pretty pissed off about that if that happened to me.
Yeah.
Just pretty big breach of personal trust. But all these things about how Donald Trump is just a terrible human being. He's a terrible candidate. Republicans will rue the day when they nominate him, if they nominate him. And then you fast forward once Trump wins and he's playing Trump with golf all the time. He's saying that the illegal activity that Trump did shouldn't be investigated, shouldn't even be investigated. He's saying that Russia and their interference in the election, which every intelligence agency, regardless of party or lean, has said Russia was actively engaged in our election for Trump's benefit. Doesn't have to mean Trump was involved, but they were actively engaged, and he wants to call it a Russian hoax, and he wants to call Bob Mueller, his investigation was a fraud. All these things that Lindsey Graham has said that he's just basically wiped away years of his reputation, years of what he's been known for. And now you've got Jamie Harrison running a really upstart campaign. He's raised he's outraised Lindsey Graham. That's, I think, the thing that I've noticed in these races is that the Democratic challengers are outraising these incumbents. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of dark money getting dropped in to to a lot of these races, but Jamie Harrison's raised a ton of money. He's a former aide to Jim Clyburn, which everybody knows. Jim Clyburn in South Carolina politics on the Democratic side. I mean, he's the dean of Democratic politics down there. He basically saved Joe Biden's nomination. His endorsement of Joe Biden, I mean, if we go back to the primary, Joe Biden lost in Iowa. He lost in New Hampshire. And he was hanging by a thread. And Jim Clyburn's endorsement pushed him over the top. And after Jim Clyburn endorsed, it was like 7 days where every other candidate dropped out except Bernie. I mean, it was incredible, the rapidity that happened. So Jamie Harrison's got ties to Clyburn. He's the former Democratic chair of the party there. It's a great fundraiser, very well liked in the state. He's running a campaign a lot like Sarah Gideon, where he's talking about how Lindsey Graham is part of the swamp now. He said he was against the swamp, but he's actually part of it. And so he's running a real strong campaign, reaching across party lines. And one of Lindsey Graham's largest donors, it was one of the founders of, I think he was one of the founders of Home Depot, not the main founder, but one of the founders of either Home Depot or Lowe's. I get those confused. I'll get in trouble for saying those names. But it was one of Lindsey's biggest donors, actually switched allegiances in this election, and is now donating to Jamie Harrison because he said it's time to change.
I saw that, yeah. So let's throw South Carolina into the Democrats column and see where that gets us. So there were some states that we didn't talk about. Dems want to turn Texas blue. I think that's a pipe dream this year. Or did we want to talk about Texas? Do you want to talk about Texas a little bit?
I think they've got a good candidate. I think it's going to be tough. I think Texas is such a big state, but Texas is an expensive state too. Trump is, I think the most interesting thing about Texas to me this time, and I don't want to denigrate MJ Hagar. I think she's a Air Force pilot. She's a great candidate. I think she'll get closer than people think on John Cornyn. I think John Cornyn's going to be tough to beat. I think the most interesting thing to me about the Texas polling is that Biden's been polling 2 or 3 points ahead of Trump. I don't think Biden's going to win Texas. I think Trump pulls Texas out because of the large rural vote. But I will tell you this, with the growth in Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, those markets, you're going to see Texas getting more purple.
Right.
What's going to be interesting is going to be how much money Trump has to spend to win Texas. And so if he has to buy in those markets, you're talking 2 of the top 4 media markets in the country with Houston and DFW, and they're expensive markets. So if he has to run commercials there, it's going to affect the presidential campaign in a big way because that's going to be money he can't spend somewhere else.
Right. And Trump has a lot of money, but it's not an endless pot.
Yeah, and so I think MJ, I think she'll run a great race, but I think she'll come up a little bit short. One other state, Gunner, before we go, that I want to mention is I'm bullish on Kansas. I think the Dems have a strong chance of picking up that seat, depending on who the Republicans nominate. If they nominate Chris Kobach on August 4th on the primary, which is just next week, hard to believe August is next week.
Right.
Barbara Bollier, Dr. Barbara Bollier is the Democratic nominee. She's a medical doctor. She's very well liked. Kansas has been trending. It's kind of odd. I was actually born in Kansas. I don't talk about that.
Right.
But I was actually born in Kansas. I never lived there. But I'll tell you that story sometime. But I was born there. Kansas has been trending more towards Democrats in the last few election cycles than people realize. And it's kind of, that Thomas Frank had that book, What's Wrong with Kansas, several years ago. Right. We talked about, why is Kansas going more Republican? Because you had the whole Sam Brown back. People forget about Sam Brown back. And
yeah, who almost bankrupted the state.
His reign of terror was terrible. But you go back in time and you look at the Republicans of the Kansas tradition, the Alf Landons, all those Republican senators that were Republican, but they were populist Republicans. And so they've got a Democratic governor. She won last time against Chris Kobach, and that's who they're probably going to nominate for this seat. He's interjected for the governorship. A lot of people just can't stand him. He's so far to the right, so idealistic and anti-immigration that he's cruel. He's viewed as cruel.
Right.
And so I think there's a strong chance the Democrats could pick up that Senate seat. And it'll be the first time they've had a Democratic senator in something like 60 years.
Right. Well, so right now we've got Kansas in the Republican column. We'll revisit that in a week or so when the primary's done. And so right now, if the election goes the way we've called it, the Dems would control the Senate 53-47, which would give them control of Congress.
Right.
So we'll see how it goes. We'll throughout the next 100 days, we'll have these podcasts on a regular basis so people can tune in and see what we're thinking and maybe get some comments to, talk about in the future. And we'll just follow the race as it goes along. And of course, we'll be here election night to weigh in and see how things are going.
Yeah, I would encourage everybody that's watching this, jump on the comments. Tell us where we're wrong. We love a good argument. So
yep.
I don't think you'll find very many places where I'm wrong. You might find some places where G-Man's wrong. But tell us where we're wrong. Let's get the debate going. The main thing I would say is, and I'll say this on every one of these we do, it's vitally important that everybody vote. So get registered. If you're not registered, get registered. Register for absentee if you can, if you want to vote by mail. If you feel comfortable voting in person and there's not going to be long waits in your state, I understand it's tough sometimes to vote in person.
Yeah.
Because people have long waits and they have to take off from work, all those things. But get registered because it's the one thing where you can actually make a difference. There's lots of things you can do to make a difference, but voting, if we don't win the elections and if you don't vote and participate, you lose that ability to complain about it. So get involved and take it as your patriotic duty. Everybody wants to talk about patriotism. To me, the most patriotic thing you can do is participate in our democracy.
Absolutely. So, plenty of people said democracy is a spectator sport. So let's suit up and get in there and vote. So no matter how you vote, just vote. So anyway, well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.
Take care.